Yeah. So I just worked 12 days in a row, including 5 days on call, so I'm not, I haven't had a lot of time to write the speech, so I've just written down some themes. Now, so what would I say about my parents' marriage? It's a hard thing to say as their son. But I think it's really a classic love story. You're two people who've been in love for a really long time. I think growing up, I always knew my parents were in love. They were always smiling at each other. They both come from the West Coast, Hokitika and Westport. And when I tell doctors from Christchurch, they'd always look at me sideways, like, is he joking? So one day I asked the registrar who came from Christchurch, what are people on the West Coast like? And she said, well, they're people that get transferred to Christchurch Hospital, who've had hard lives, that are suffering due to their poor lifestyle choices.
Not true.
So I'm glad you quit smoking, Dad. You're still here. That's good. So my parents were both actors when they met, and they really were, acting actors. And when they met, my dad suffered the loss of his mother, and my mum was a great support for him right from the beginning. They got married. They went overseas and travelled all over the world. When not a lot of people did that back then. It wasn't easy. My children, there was no business class. Imagine that. So then they moved to Wanganui, which some people call Whanganui and some people call Honganui, and I'm perennially confused which one it is. My dad had to quit full-time acting because of me. That was my fault. And they built a pole house, and I would play in the pole house, and of course that's when they met Martin, who was much like another son for them, of course. And Martin was 11, is that right? And he's been right through my whole life. Martin's been part of our family. One really thing I thought was really cool when I reflected on it recently was they had a friend who was an actor who had quite bad schizophrenia, and he really did suffer from schizophrenia. But he would often live with us, and in that era, people with schizophrenia were often locked away in places where no one could see them, and it really was very progressive. And he was like an uncle to me, and we often shared the same bedroom, and statistically, you're not likely to be harmed by schizophrenic, but there was a lot of fear in that era, and I think that's just a reflection of the kind of people my parents are. So they had a lot of love and trust for Autumn Lowe back then. What was life like with my parents? Well, it was like the Good Life. If you watch The Good Life, it's literally them. It's like a documentary. And I think maybe Martin's parents were the Margot and Jerry of the show. They had a lot of parties with a lot of actors, and they were very vivacious parties where they would play a lot of Leo Sayer records, Bee Gees records, and at the end of the night they would dance to We're All Alone by Boz Scaggs, gazing into each other's eyes. And I remember that as a child, so if I ever hear that song, I think of my parents dancing like that. And then another one I wrote down, it was a real random coincidence. I wrote down the guy died the same day, so I hope that's not an omen, but David Crosby died about 2 days ago, the day I was thinking of writing this down. I hope I didn't kill him. So Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Teacher, Children, Our House, all that hippie stuff, it really was the good life with some very liberal parents. An older colleague of mine said, if you are not a Labour supporter at 20, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a National supporter at 40, you don't have a brain. I watched that transition through my parents' life as well. But then of course things didn't go so well for New Zealand. New Zealand had an amazingly divisive government. Who would have guessed we ever had one of those? And there was Rogernomics, and there was Ruth Richardson, and financially it was very hard. And so my parents had to really stick together and just uplift us and shift the whole family to Auckland. And I know it was a really tough time. And we rented houses for a few years, and I remember the stress of you guys looking to buy a house and paying the enormous sum of money of $160,000 for this place, which was quite a stretch at the time. I don't have to tell you about Martin setting the house on fire in Orewa, because he already mentioned it. Then we were teenagers, and my dad had to build the Great Wall of East Coast Road and that bedroom over there to separate my sisters. And there were certainly quite a few turbulent times through those years, but I felt like you really did it as a team, you know, you didn't turn on each other. Lauren, don't say anything about you know, me turning on mum at this point. You really had your roles, you trusted each other. It's very clear that you loved each other. 2 of your children had to change schools. And you had a wonderful dog named Piaf, of course, who you've already mentioned earlier today. Since then, 3 weddings, 6 grandchildren, a place in Waiheke, and 1 retirement. Should be 2 retirements. You're 76, Dad, you know. Anyway, that's what I felt is really my perspective on your marriage. So congratulations, and I'd like to raise a glass, and if we could just share my